Welcome to the Live Better, Sell Better podcast with your host, Kevin Dorsey of Inside Sales Excellence, the #1 Patreon group and YouTube channel for tech sellers and tech sales leaders, where we dive in deep for tactical advice on how to book more meetings, close more deals faster, and lead sales teams to success. But we don't stop there. We also focus on the person in salesperson. We talk about mindset, goals, time management, and so much more. So thank you for listening. And if you're interested, head on over to patreon.com/inside sales excellence. Now with that, grab a notepad, get ready, and let's dive into the good stuff.
How much of your workday is actually spent selling? Like, be honest, I won't tell. This can stay between us. Because between internal meetings, back and forth emails, updating Salesforce, salespeople, Dooley found nearly half of a rep's day is spent on anything but sales. But what really gets me is how much this hurts sellers. All those distractions are killing rep earning potential by 66% and quarterly revenue by 38%. It is a lose-lose. That is why top performing sales teams like Asana, Figma, and Intercore use Dooley, the connected workspace that automates all the CRM work reps hate and routes deals to close wins faster with guided playbooks and call templates, giving sales leaders the clean, accurate data they need to run a winning sales process without the wasted admin hours. Get a lifeline for your sales pipeline. Visit Dooley.ai to learn more and try it free.
And with that, let's get back to the show.
What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Live Better, Sell Better podcast. This is your host, Kevin Dorsey, aka KD, and we are going to pull back the veil. We are going to raise the curtain on what is actually going on at the best of the best SaaS sales companies out there in terms of how they do compensation, how they structure their culture, but also lifting the veil for reps on what you need to look for. Because so often you can get dazzled by the shiny object. They've raised money, they're a rocket ship, they've got a former Googler in the lead, like whatever it is. Then you get in and it's something completely different than what you were expecting. And that's why I'm so pumped to have Ryan Walsh on the show with me today. One, a recovering CRO, similar to myself. We do need to go through some recovery after being in the game for so long, but also the CEO of RepVue, where that is the mission of pulling back the veil and making roles more transparent for salespeople. So we're going to dive into what to look for, what to ask, but also for sales leaders, what you need to be doing to attract the best talent out there. Ryan, my man, welcome to the show.
Awesome. KD, thanks for having me. Glad to talk about it. Love it. We're passionate about it. I'm passionate about it. I think about it all day long. Yes, my recovery period has been longer than anticipated, but I'm getting through it. I'm working through it. You and I can talk about that after the podcast. What are some of my 7 steps to get through it?
Indeed, I might need that checklist. But although, as we were discussing right before we hit record, is you're no longer in recovery mode. You're in build mode. You're just building a company, right? One letter changed. You went from CRO to CEO, and now you're back into the game here. But so what I want to do, man, is I want to dive into this because I think it's a fun topic that people dance around. We tiptoe around it. We don't really get into the weeds of it. And I want to start with, for reps out there that are looking for roles, what should they be looking for, right? Because if you read the job ads, they all sound the same, right? So what should reps be looking for in a role to know whether or not it's a good fit for them?
Yeah. So there's a lot of directions we could go with this question, but let me start with, yes, the job ads all look the same. And there's probably another podcast for another day about the actual process of hiring and getting on board at some of these companies and how it needs a serious transformation. And that's something that we think a lot about as well. But not only do the job ads, the pitches sound the same, right? You mentioned Series A, Series B, Series C. They're all telling you the same thing. Great culture. We just raised all this money. Grow, 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 grow. Right. And there's a few things and so before we jump into how do you find this information, there's this concept, especially a lot of people come to me every single day talking about, I want to get into tech. I want to get into, an earlier stage company. I'm at XYZ giant company, Salesforce, Oracle. I want to go earlier. Fund, maybe equity might be worth something. There's this concept that when you're in a Series A, Series B, Series C, every company hits this, right? There's some amount of greenfield opportunity, right? And then you marry that with what is the capacity that's already overlaid on that greenfield opportunity for the sales organization. And what we see for sales orgs that are very, very high regarded in some of these earlier stages is that capacity simply has not caught up with that greenfield opportunity, right? It's a very simple thing, right? We just, and to put it even more clearly, there's room to hire 15 more reps, and there's still opportunity for those 15. They can still eat, right? They can still get those opportunities. There's more coming in and coming in. The problem is you start to raise that Series B of 80 million, 150 million, and then you pile on another 70 reps. At some point, every company starts to, not in every, I mean, some of these, obviously you look at some of these huge SaaS companies or huge tech companies, there's a ton of greenfield opportunity, right? So you can hire a lot, but a lot of these companies, they're sexy, they're newer, they raised a bunch of money. The delta between the capacity that has already been hired from a salesperson perspective and that greenfield, that's starting to shrink. And at some point you reach a tipping point, right? At some kind of, there's an arc there where you reach a tipping point where now you're kind of fighting this battle of creating more. And how do you create more? How do you create more of that greenfield, right? Through product, right? Innovations, through you're expanding your product, which might expand your market, through deal size, which expands your TAM as well. Right. So you can expand it, but are you expanding it at a rate that's outpacing your talent acquisition? And so for me, a huge sign is we try and look for that. And we see through what we're building at RepVue, we see some of these orgs that are kind of smaller or rated really, really well. And we talk about that, like they have not hit that tipping point. So maybe it's a great time to join. But at the same time, you have to be very cautious because you could be the rep that is the tipping point, right? And you don't want to be that. You don't want to be that higher, right? And that can be hard to dig into.
Let's hit that real quick. How could we, right? Like, what questions should a rep ask, or what should they look for in a company, right, to tell, like, okay, what is the capacity, right? Like, do I still feel there's a green field or not? Like, are there questions they could ask? Are there things that they can do to try to suss some of that out?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the basics of questions, and we're huge advocates of this at RepVue, and we have the data to back it up. But regardless of whether we have the data, just ask the question, like, what percent of the team hit their target last quarter? Right? Is it 35%? Is it 80%? Is it, what is that number? And then it's a loaded question, because what should that number be is another question, right? So some of these companies that are hiring aggressively, it's almost like, all right, well, what percent of maybe like of the folks who were there a year, like what hit? And then also a company may be very highly regarded, might have an incredible RepVue score, but maybe that number is a little bit lower. So it's like, where are you in that tipping point, right? And I think that I always start with what percent of the team hits quota this quarter, last quarter, or this year, last year, sort of thing. We start with that. And I personally, when I think about the different aspects of what makes a sales org great or what doesn't, you look at culture, you look at professional development, you look at the incentive comp plan. You look at lead flow, and is it all cold calls, or is it all, inbound, right? And then what other things are important to you? Is D&I important to you? Is, it just depends on what's important to you. But there's some basics, right, that are super important. And it starts for me, and what I advise people, it starts with the product, because really the product drives winning cures a lot of bad culture, right? I mean, everybody's winning, you get away with a lot, right? And so I think that winning is the most correlated factor is, where does your product sit in the market, right? Is it driving demand? Are you're particularly now in tech, there's always going to be competitors, right? So how do you sit in that? How do you sit within that? And I used to say, I had a phrase I like to use a lot, which is, you throw a great leadership team at a bad product and the product wins every time. right? I mean,
there,
it's just,
been there.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter what you do. So I think the product piece, and then, well, how do you dig into that, right? Like, what do you do? Like, who are your competitors? Tell me. I like to get, you get a lot of interview advice from people, and they'll say things like, the interviewers are going to ask you some very specific examples, right? Okay, well, flip the script. Tell me 3 deals that you lost last month, and why did you lose those deals, right? As an interviewee, right? And like, tell me why you lost those deals, right? So like, it's so funny because nobody ever thinks like that. They think, well, that they're going to ask you very specific. You tell me a big deal you won, and walk me through this specific process and why, Okay, well, yeah, like it's great to show specific. Or if you're interviewing for a leadership role, tell me about a really challenging, employee, issue you had to deal with, and how did you, what did you do, right? Well, tell me about a really challenging prospect your sales organization had and you lost, and walk me through the steps of why you lost it, what you could have done differently. I love that kind of stuff. Make them squirm a little bit too. And then the last thing I'll say is don't get the references that they give you, right? Don't, hey, can I talk to somebody on the team? Yeah, here's Sally Closer, right? And she's made 300K last year on a 120 OTE, and she loves working here. Hey, Sally, why don't you go talk to Kevin? How about we independently get somebody? And I'd love to talk to, if possible, can I talk to somebody that's done really well? Can I talk to somebody that hasn't? And honestly, we can help with this for a lot of companies. A former employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's, well, that's gonna be biased. They left, right? Well, that's not always the case, right? I mean, people leave jobs a lot, and many times I see, maybe it's just I look at LinkedIn a lot, and they're always talking about how grateful they are for the opportunity. So,
there's some survivor's bias there, right? Those are the ones that are posting, right? But if you think about everybody leaving, because you and I have talked about this, and actually, I think this is a good follow-up, right? You and I talked about this really actually when RepVue was getting started, and it was actually one of my concerns, right? I was like, well, how do you guard against that, right? Because sales is a relatively high turnover role, good or bad, right? You have more people leaving, which sometimes can poison the water, right? Of like, disgruntled or didn't work out. And like, so how can a rep kind of weed through the good and the bad? Like, how do you know the good's actually good? But also, how do you know if the bad's actually bad, right? You could go look up reviews on me. 10 people that love me. One's like, he's the worst leader I've ever worked for. All he cares about is LinkedIn. He's not like, and all this. And it's like, whoa, how do you try to suss that out? Like, how can you tell the realness of it all?
Yeah, it is. We think about this all the time. We get asked about this all the time. And when talk about, Glassdoor, people say RepVue's kind of like Glassdoor for sales. Well, yes and no. I think we structure everything as data driven, right? There's no rage typing about KD, my former manager. Like what happened in that scenario that you just described with the person that didn't appreciate, the engagement they had with you, was they got some gratification for posting that on the internet for themselves personally, and however they want to describe it, right? When you take the emotion out of it, which we have done, because it's simply data and ratings. We're not asking people to tell me about your manager. We're not asking me to how bad was the avocado in the break room, right? Like we don't want that information. It's not valuable to our users. What we try and do is structure data so you can compare companies with similar data sets, right? Like, well, relatively speaking, when we have 800 ratings from Salesforce and 400 ratings for HubSpot, how does the overall culture score compare, or how does the lead flow, like you can dive into that at kind of even a role level. Like we try and take emotion out of it, and really just drive it based on data, right? I've always said, like, Glassdoor, you get 45% disgruntled, 45% HR told me to do it, 10% in the middle, maybe that's valuable, and some portion of that salespeople. And at the end of the day, too, it's also about numbers. What percent of team people really value? What percent of team hits quota? So we kind of package all that into a relative RepVue score. Our goal is not to disparage companies. Like we have no desire to do that. Our goal is to shine a light on companies that are being providing an exceptionally positive experience to their employees. Our goal is to highlight those types of companies for sales professionals so that they can get into those roles. They're all hiring. And maybe some of the ones that have areas to improve, we want to help them improve their organization with data as well. Here's where you need to improve. There's, so for us, that's really core to the mission we have no desire. And honestly, I hear more on a daily basis, more people that are super pumped about their roles than are upset. Yes, we hear like, I got sold a bill of goods and I ended up in this place and et cetera, et cetera. We hear more like, this is great. I got into a great opportunity, a great role. Will that work out in 3 years? Maybe, maybe not. But, they're super excited. We hear that positivity so much more, which is what drives us. But honestly, getting in, it's such a leap of historically, right? As a career salesperson, right? One of the reasons I probably never left my career, I spent 16 years at the same company, is because of that fear of unknown, right? Like, okay, I'm doing pretty well here. Like, I could do better there, but also it could just be a complete shit show, right? I could get over there and then I'm going to tuck my tail and come back and say, all right, hey, yeah, okay, maybe you were right. And so now it's like, is it possible to give people more confidence in that decision, right? Maybe, I think so, and that's kind of what we hope to help with a little bit too. But it's hard. It's hard that you're asking questions like, how do you know, right, if it's the right org, right? And I'm saying like, yeah, product market fit. A lot of times you're still asking people's opinions, and you're of that. So it is difficult, and we're trying to make a difficult process, somewhat easier on the reps.
And we can go down this one layer deeper, right? Like comp aside, right? Because that's what drives a lot of salespeople, right? Like, what's the OTE? What's the comp? Do you have suggestions on how to know if the role is right for you? Because not every sales role is the same, right? So do you give guidance on like, okay, based on like what you like or how you like to sell, like what are some pieces of advice you can give there? Because I think people, they just get blinded by an OTE and you realize, well, wait a minute, that's a fast transactional SMB sale versus a strategic mid-market or enterprise sale. Like, what are some things that a rep should actually be asking themselves, right? So they get asked questions by the interviewer. They're supposed to ask the interviewer, what are some questions the rep should be asking themselves before going into a role?
Yeah, absolutely. We think a lot about this, okay? And this is actually, RepVue's been around for a couple of years now. When we originally built the platform, one of the core things we did was like, all right, yeah, people are like, oh, you can rate your org. Okay, fine. Okay, yeah, but there's a kind of a slight variation of something that we put into that process. It takes like 2.5 minutes all in. There's 7 categories that we think are important, and these are important to understand if the company's good at them. To your question, they're also very important to understand how valuable that is in your career. Like, do you care about that? Right. So when you look at it, like, how important is base comp, incentive comp structure, culture and leadership, product market fit, diversity and inclusion, lead flow, and professional development? Those are, I think I got them. Those are the 7. So before you join RepVue, as part of the process, we give you those 7 things and we say, stack rank them, right? And so we know, right, you, Katie, as an individual, cares a lot about lead flow first. I'm just making this up. Professional development second, right? And then on down the road, and maybe culture's last. Which is probably not true, but whatever.
Yeah.
And so then, all right. Well, what does that mean? So then we know company A is really strong at lead flow, and then you can look at that data. We look at data all the time. What is he cares about lead flow first? Well, maybe Katie's not the cold calling type, right? Or whatever, right? Maybe he's not as comfortable with that, excels in role, or maybe professional development is more important because you're in your first year as an AE, right? Versus like you, Ryan Walsh, that professional development is going to be last. Just give me a phone, and a good comp plan, and I'm probably okay, right? I don't need to try and learn. This old dog here doesn't need a new sales methodology to pick up at my age. And so then we know company A and company B and company C are really strong at lead flow. That means a lot of inbound. So KD, that's what he cares about, right? And so it's actually a really important exercise for people to think through like what they value. And it's not just that stuff. It's also like big company, small company, right? Like that's huge. Like, and we've seen it all the time. I've hired hundreds and hundreds of salespeople and never got it. You know, we always got some of them wrong, even, you know, after I'd done it for years and years. And you look back and you're like, yeah, we should have probably caught that on us. Yep, probably on us. Like, yeah, how do we do our training? How do they like to learn? Our sales org's 250 people. They did really well in a 5-person sales org. Okay. You know, we weren't like, you know, Ford assembly line pro, but we had a lot of process and structure. And so like maybe that, you know, big company, small company, you know, there's so many different things. How technical is your product? Like, and so we try and capture data, and our vision on that is just capture enough very basic data. Like we know where you sold because you did ratings. We know who those personas are as well. Like, hey, you know, Katie can go talk to the CMO all day long, but you know, hasn't really had experience talking to the CFO, like in selling into that org. I sell to marketers, but and that makes a difference too. There's a lot of little things, and people, and I've heard a number of people say things like, well, such an excellent salesperson, they could sell to really anyone. Like maybe, but like you'll be way better if you know where you've really had success and double down a little bit on that.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
I love that call out because it's true, right? Just like I would rather, right, be blowing out a quota, blowing out a number versus, okay, not blowing it out, right? This is what I'm good at. I even know this about myself as a sales leader. About 200 is like my ceiling in terms of how large I like my org to be.
Yeah.
Once it's that big, I don't feel like I'm close enough to it anymore. I don't feel like I'm in it anymore. Changes take too long. Like I'm the builder and I know that about myself. And now I'm proactively, right? I get opportunities thrown all the time. I'm like, no, like I don't want to step into an org that's 200 already and go to 500. I'm the one that gets you to 200, right? And knowing those strengths and knowing your preferences, I think is really, really important because I'm a huge believer in role fit just as much as skill fit. There are a lot of very talented, hardworking, good salespeople that are in the wrong roles for them. Maybe they are more strategic versus transactional. Maybe they are more inbound than outbound. Maybe they do like to change fast, or they just need the playbook. Just give me the playbook and I'll go. And I think knowing that about yourself is so important. I love that y'all are building that in to kind of try to help people establish that early on.
Yeah, 100%. Right. I mean, you know, interviewing, right? Like I bet at Patient Pop, like a lot of it on, I'm just guessing here, pipeline velocity was probably huge, right? You're not going to hire, depending on your deal size, if it's 8K or whatever, like for 8K, like you don't want a 190K average seller, right? It's just not going to work, right? It's not. And the same, if you've got 100K average deal size, you have to have somebody that can manage closing 8 to 10 deals a year, not somebody that needs to close 6 deals a month.
Yes.
Right? It's just a completely different experience. You'd have to train. Oh, they're a great salesperson. Yeah, but it's just not the right fit. I've seen so many sellers that we hired that didn't do so well. And I knew they'd be highly successful somewhere else because of some of the mistakes we made in fit up front earlier in my career. And so that, that experience, we're trying to do it at scale with what we're doing at RepVue. But, it's, and I think you've seen too, right? Like, leaders at orgs that are building, right, 30 sales org size, 50, like they haven't seen, like they're still figuring that out too. And so I'll go back to one of the things, like when you get to be like a 600 person company, 800 person company, 1,000 person company, you're going to want to, somebody needs to have the skill at the head of sales seat, in the head of sales seat, that has seen those like experienced leadership makes a difference, right? And so you're past the phase of kind of gritty startup, and so you can probably afford to bring somebody in that's scaled significantly, and so that's another thing I'll look at, depending on where the company is in the life cycle, right? If it's a 500 person startup, like what is that leader, like what experience does that leader have And will I become like, will they have the infrastructure for me to be supported as a seller, whether it's tech stack, whether it's, very well-baked process. I get, it's such a huge problem, is like disorganized lead routing. And I know from you like building, like that's the kind of stuff you got to build, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that makes a huge difference in the day-to-day selling world of a seller. Well, this lead should have gone to me, right? Why did it go to Sally Closer over there, right? Like, why does Sally get all the, like that
ROE disputes, my man. Those are my favorite conversations every week. Well, actually, let's flip this real quick as we start to come up on time. Let's flip it to, because also we could talk about VP hiring and what to look for there in a whole nother episode. Because at this point, I'm actually very strongly convinced most A's should not be hiring a VP. They should be hiring a director and a consultant, because they can't afford you. They can't afford me, someone who's actually built. So they get a first timer to step in who was a part of a build, but wasn't building. And they hope they can figure it out, which is just a massive mistake. You need a great director ahead of with someone who's done it as an advisor consultant. And that combo is, I think, the best build framework. But if we look at what then the best orgs seem to be doing right? The ones that are scoring high on RepVue, like the things that are in their control, what are you seeing? Because product market fit isn't always in their control. The capacity kind of is, right? Like you should have stopped hiring, but whatever. Like from the things that are in a sales org's control, what are the best of the best doing out there to attract and retain the best talent?
Yeah, I mean, this one, people can debate this a little bit. You need to have a modern setup, right? I mean, you need there's so many sales tools out there. And so I'm not going to get into who's better than who necessarily, but you need to have a full modern selling stack, number one, right? I think that's kind of table stakes at this point. And you can debate what that modern stack is, but I think most of the folks listening will have a general sense of what, what they should have. Right. I mean, I think that's number two. We just talked about like process, right? And then that can be a scary word too, right? That can be like, man, but so what's the balance between autonomy within a process and lack thereof, right? And so I'm a huge proponent of strong guidelines, guide rails that are governing the whole system, and then letting salespeople do what they do best within those guidelines, within those boundaries, right? So what is I don't want to have, like, if I have a good salesperson, I don't want to have a script for every call, right? I don't want to have, you got cadences and you got email, stuff. And of course, you're trying to drive lead gen. I get all that. That's fine. But I'm talking about the sellers and the seller's autonomy. And ultimately, my philosophy has always been, this is the information I need to do my job as a CRO. I need this information, like, to go up the chain, to continue to go up the chain. If we can get that information and we're executing well, like, I want to give a lot of autonomy to managers, directors, and salespeople themselves. If we're struggling, then we dive in a little bit deeper. So I think, I think the tech stack is important. I think autonomy is important. I think how transparent is leadership about everything, right? Like, why? Like, I think expectations minus reality equals disappointment. Okay, so there's a literal mathematical formula in there, and you can apply it to hiring, right? Like, hey, I expected 40 leads per month to me as a rep, and I'm getting 15. Okay, well, 40 minus 15 equals disappointment, right? Now, if you had said, hey, it's going to be 15, you got to drive your pipeline, huge difference. Like, because I know what I'm getting into. Maybe that pushes a few people out of the interview cycle that would have. And it's the same thing within an organization. Hey, we're changing the comp plan, right? Okay, well, that's scary. Okay, well, here's exactly why. Here's the impact we expect on everybody, et cetera, et cetera. Or, hey, this process is changing, right? Like, why every opportunity as a leader to communicate is an opportunity to develop your people as well, right? Like, there's some subset of your people, every organization, like when you were running patient pop sales org there, like, some subset of those people are going to be VP of sales one day somewhere, likely, right? Hopefully. And that'd be awesome for you, right? That's huge. And I love it. I love when I see people that were on my team that are now killing it somewhere else. Like, and I just think to every decision you make regarding communication, regarding transparency, regarding, what information you give them, how you coach them, it's more than just getting in a one-on-one and coaching people. You're delivering decision-making process in an open, transparent way that's going to shape how these people and these team members and your employees understand about transparency, understand about decisions, and also just understand about process and structure of how to run a team. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, transparency is just a huge thing of decisions, right? And obviously there's some things you can't always share, but at some level, if you're a CRO, you get to decide what a lot of that is, for the most part. So those are a couple thoughts on that.
Yeah. And those are lessons I've learned as well. I'd rather over communicate at this point in my career than under. I'd rather share too much than share too little, because of that point you made, right? Where it's like those expectations get misaligned and there's so many unspoken expectations. And I think that's where a lot of leaders get in trouble, is there's expectations that never got discussed. And because they never got discussed, you don't even actually know what the expectation is of your people, of your managers. And there's already that gap and divide there, and being able to speak to those things and dive in. I was actually just talking about this with a VP that I'm mentoring and working with right now. He's like, I have an open door policy. I was like, okay, do you understand the point of the open door though? It's for you to walk out, not for them to walk in. You have to go out to your people and find out what's happening, find out what's going wrong, find out what they want, what they don't want, what they like, what they don't like, and being proactive there. It's not open door policy for people to walk through is wrong. You have to walk out your door. That's the whole point of an open door policy.
It's the big, honestly, in my opinion, as a VP of sales or CRO or whatever, like one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge of the remote environment is you're just not going to have the same level of touch points with your team, period. Right. I mean, we were not a remote company. We had some remote folks and we had a couple, we had offices, multiple offices, sales offices around the world. But, A, I go to every single one of them on a very regular basis. B, you just, even just chatting with the team, the vibe, right? Like you just can't get that. And that's really hard. And I don't think I have not been in that seat since post-pandemic. So I don't think I have a great answer for it yet. I think I would probably have to do it myself, try and figure it out. What are some of the Zoom happy hour? Like, I don't know if I'm really feeling that. As
definitely
the same
not.
thing.
That passed within the first 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks, it was cool. After that, people were like, I swear to God, you invite me to another Zoom happy hour, I'm going to lose my shit.
Right. So it is, I mean, that for me is probably the most challenging thing about leading a large sales organization in a 100% remote environment is you lose that personal touch. No matter how hard you try, you lose it. You can't be on the office floor with 6 people, on the sales floor with 6 people there, or walk by and just listen to a call and say, hey, try this next time, or, hey, a great call or whatever, just impossible to do. Which is, I think is going to be a headwind in people development over time, but we'll adjust, we'll adapt.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because there's ways to do it and you have to just be so much more intentional and proactive around it. But interestingly enough, you just touched on at the very end there, the number one metric that I saw impact across this pandemic and shift to remote was ramp time. Mm-hmm. That was the only metric that didn't recover in terms of figuring out how to do it better. Was able to get close rates back up, able to get pipeline back up, able to get was able to function. Ramp time, the absorption of new information, the onboarding process. That is where I saw the biggest hit to productivity. Was it took almost 2 months longer to ramp, and that's coming from me. Right? Where I have an onboarding program and we focus heavily on training and coaching and review, and we have the process. That was the hardest thing remotely to do, was how to onboard people in a way, because now they're sitting in their bedroom, right? They're sitting in their room. They're not hearing it all day long. They're not getting supported all day long. They're not getting that, the buddy that leans over and goes, oh, hey, try this next time. That was by far and away the hardest thing over the last 2 years to try to figure out. And we made improvements, but I can't even say that I truly figured it out. because it took so much more time to ramp people up. So,
Yeah.
and actually, shoot, speaking of time, we're already at 40 minutes. See, this is the problem, man, is like I can go all day on some of these things, and I want to make sure that like we can wrap it here. So I got two final questions for you, right? So the first one, right, we tend to call it like the big three, where it's like, we've been going for about 40 minutes or so. Like, if you wanted to make sure people remembered three things from this episode in terms of, what to look for, how to structure an order, like, or even so much of how to score high on RepVue, what would those three pieces of advice be?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I'll kind of split this up a little bit. I think people in their careers, I do think we need to try and think about being patient a little bit more at whatever level that you're at. And I know that people are getting recruited all the time, all day long. I know there's a lot of opportunities out there. Frankly, we're trying to help with evaluating those opportunities of what we're building at RepVue. I don't think there's anything wrong with, if you're happy and you see a path, like just be a little patient. I was patient. Again, this is years ago, right? 15 plus years ago, when I was kind of running through that same motion that a lot of our salespeople that are probably listening to this are. But I think just take a step back and try and be patient and really thoughtful about some of those decisions that you make. Number two, product market fit. I'm going to go back to that. It can be hard to dive into, but the most important thing that will drive the success of the business, frankly, is the product market fit. Like, is the product winning? Is it a leader? There's a huge difference in your ability to succeed when you're selling the number one product in the market versus the number four product in the market. Huge, right? One is going to win, two is going to get a bunch of wins, three, it starts to get tough, four down, like, okay, you're swimming upstream, right? I think that's, I think that's important. Then let me touch on the last thing that you said about ramp time. I'll use my third bullet on that, which is everybody should really think about that as a salesperson, right? So Katie just described his biggest hurdle as a sales leader was can't get them up ramp time. What can you do as a seller to help mitigate that? Like, how do you be intentional about listening in on calls, like seeking out calls? Like, hey, are you using like a chorus or a gong or one of those types of things? Like, how can I get my hands on literally every call in the library? Good calls, bad calls. Ask the person that did the call, the salesperson that's been there for a while, like ask if they have 10 minutes to just answer your questions about the call, right? Like, what are the things that you can go through your training stuff, go through it twice, right? Like, because you're looking at ramp time as your number one problem there, as you described. I believe that makes perfect sense. And so what about those 3 reps out of 20 that you hired last year that like blew out the ramp time? Like, how do you view them? Like, I don't know, but they got something, right? Be one of those people, right? And you can choose to do that, right? You can choose, or you can choose not to do that. There's so much of what we do and drive success are choices that we make, right? Versus skill set versus talent. It's intentional choices that you elect to make and commit yourself to. So I'll leave that as the third one, which is, be intentional about how you do things like that.
There's my word again, man. Intention is my favorite word. It's my favorite word as a leader, as a father, as a husband, as a person. It's like, what are you doing with intention? Right? I talked about this a lot with my teams and my managers. 10 minutes of intention is better than an hour of attention. Like, what is your intention here? Are you on that practice to actually get better? Or are you on that practice because I had to take a practice? Are you listening to the call to get better? Or are you listening to the call because, well, Ryan said on a podcast, I should listen to more calls. And so it's like, what's that intention behind what you're doing? That's what drives everything. And then the last question I want to ask here, right? So the name of the podcast is Live Better, Sell Better. So I also have this weird idea, right? That if we lived better, if we had more joy, more energy, more happiness, more fulfillment, that the sales would also improve. What would your live better advice be for people listening?
I mean, I think that the advice I like to give people is that don't let your performance on a leaderboard define who you are as a human being, right? There's so many things that are more important, right? Family, mental health, right? Like at the end of the day, it's like I made a few less dollars, right? I didn't do as well as I wanted to do. I'm working hard, but don't take performance on the leaderboard as performance in life, right? When you look back at it, you're not going to remember, hey, let me think, Q2 2007, I was number 2 out of 11. No, that doesn't matter. What matters is how you treat people. What matters is how you treat your family. What matters is the legacy you leave. It's not a score. It's not a leaderboard. And so, like, hey, if you're, because I've seen people that really struggle with, not doing as well. There's so many things and factors that are out of your control in your performance at work that will impact you negatively. And so you need to realize that. And I think when you look at what's in control in your life outside of work, I think where we live, like, and here in the US for the most part, there's so much that is in our control, right? We can control more of that. And so I think let that define you. Let your, how you treat people, your family, let that define you, not your position on a leaderboard. So I'll leave folks with that. Hopefully they'll help 1 or 2 people.
That's always the goal with this, right? One or two. And that's also why I love the mission that you're on, because there's this idea, right, of work-life balance, right? Work-life balance, which I don't believe in, because work-life balance implies that they're on 2 opposite ends of the teeter-totter, right? Like they're 2 opposite ends. It's work-life integration, right? It's really hard to have a good home life if your work life sucks. And it's really hard to have a great work life if your home life sucks. They go together. And so my hope with what you're doing, right, is if people can get into better opportunities, that also helps them live better, because they are happy, they are having fun, they are making the money that they want to make, and that carries across everything. And so, my man, this was great. Where can people get more of you? Where can they find you? Where can they find out what RepVue is doing? Like, where are you putting out good stuff?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I post, typically a few times a week at least. Easy to find on LinkedIn. RepVue's got a huge presence on LinkedIn. We dabble a little bit on Insta. We dabble a little bit on TikTok, believe it or not. So we're really easy to find. RepVue.com. You can join. It's free, of course, for salespeople. Just takes about 2 minutes to add a rating to join. So super easy. It's a light lift, and then check out the data we've got on there. It really is mission driven for salespeople to help with career opportunities and career guidance. And anybody can reach out to me. I'm very accessible as well via LinkedIn or whatever. So I appreciate it.
Hell yeah, my man. Well, this was awesome. It's exactly what I was hoping it would be. I'm sure we'll be having many chats in the future anyway about RepVue and how to make the world better for salespeople. But I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate you.